Donald Trump turning up the heat. He stated this morning that he will reveal his tax proposal in the coming weeks. This is what he had to say about his tax plan on Fox Business earlier this month.
We have to simplify our system. At a minimum, we have to simplify our system. And I would like to see a reduction in taxes. We have to simplify our system.
Reduction in corporate taxes or all
absolutely.
Taxes? What?
A reduction in all taxes, but especially corporate and especially for the middle class.
And Mr. Trump is hinting that he will team up with fellow Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz to protest the Iran nuclear deal on September 9th down on Capitol Hill. Joining me now, Pete Hegseth, Concerned Veterans for America CEO and Fox News contributor. Also, Chris Hahn, progressive radio host and a former aide to Senator Chuck Schumer. And Christian Whitten, former Bush State Department senior advisor. Let's take it to you, Mr. Whitten. What do you make of the fact that now Mr. Trump appears to be getting very serious, and now he's coming out with policy proposals besides immigration?
Well, I think it's a natural next step, and I think he's probably going to continue to do very well. You know, it's a combination of policy and populism. He's not actually just calling for tax cuts. Interestingly, he will call for some tax increases, including basically closing the loophole whereby hedge funds, venture capitalists pay less because they pay carried interest. They pay a capital gains rate instead of the higher rate of income tax that the rest of us pay. So I will bet, as with immigration and other issues, that Donald Trump probably hits a gusher on this, combination of clarity and populism.
Chris, here's the thing with Mr. Trump. He doesn't get pressure from lobbyists or donors because he's funding his own campaign. That's why I think people are so attracted to what he is saying and what his policy proposals are. In other words, they don't come prepackaged from anybody pressuring him what to say. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's true. But I got to say, it's a little inconsistent. I mean, just 3 days ago, he said he'd raise his own taxes and raise taxes on hedge funds. Now, had Obama said that, we'd be calling him a socialism. Trump goes up in the GOP primary polls. So I'm very anxious to see what he comes out with next week. I'm wondering who's actually preparing it for him. The guy's got unlimited resources. He could hire the best minds in finances to come up with a great tax plan. So I'm anxious to see what he says, and I'm anxious to see if it's consistent with some of the statements he's made just in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, both Chris and it's Mr. Whiten, by the way. Both, Pete, they're both raising some really good points here. And here's the deal. I think that Mr. Trump is now moving to a more populist appeal. In other words, that the hedge fund guys pay a 20%, a lower rate on their income than other people. I would say a flat tax for everybody. But he seems to be center-left almost in his proposals. He doesn't want to cut Social Security, for example.
Well, on the tax code, he is doubling down on populism here. He's calling himself the king of the tax code, and he's saying, we know he's, Chris said he's like Obama in that sense. Wrong. We know Donald Trump is a capitalist. We know he believes in a flatter and simpler tax code, but he's willing to go with that popular sentiment that people feel like those at the top that can exploit it and game the system and exploit the loopholes and pay a lot less. He wants to close that and then cut taxes for other people. Now, there's very few Republicans that have ever said that or will say that. So he's doubling down on populism, big time, and forsaking some traditional Republican principles. There's no doubt.
Now, I didn't say he was like Obama. I said if Obama had said what Trump said last week, people on the right would be calling Obama a socialist.
Because he's a statist. Because he is. Because he is, right? His track record is that he wants to grow government and tax people more.
The capitalist system in this country recovered under President Obama. It was on its way to despair under President Bush.
Hang on.
And this president saved capitalism for the whole world.
We also have extraordinarily high tax rates and about $18 trillion in federal debt on the books. Mr. Whiten, what do you make of the fact that now it seems that Mr. Trump is almost like a locomotive? Now he's picking up steam. In other words, now he's getting policy proposals. If he turns into a more serious candidate and doesn't get ensnared in these fights with, reporters who are asking, basically battering him with questions, if he comes out as a more serious candidate, is he a threat?
I think he's already a threat, but he can still do both. In the last cycle in 2012, I worked for Newt Gingrich, and Newt was at the top of the polls and at his finest when he was at war with the media. This is the lesson of Trump, is that people are livid at Washington. And if you look at, it's true on the left, if you look at the rise of Bernie Sanders, but on the right, Republicans don't just despise President Obama and Hillary Clinton. They are also very, very irritated at John Boehner and Mitch McConnell. And this is going to be sort of an add-on when Trump does his tax code release least, I think, because Republicans also, we sort of assume that Wall Street leans Republicans or because it's pro-free market, it's more on the right. There's actually a tremendous amount of animosity on the right. If you look at companies like Citibank and JP Morgan, they seem to be run by Democrats for Democrats. So I think Trump is really going to basically put some policy meat on the bones, but keep doing what he's doing.
I just want to clarify what I just said. I think every candidate should be grilled by every journalist, and they should be asking a lot of questions. What I meant to say is not focused on one issue, immigration. Now he's spreading out, and he's coming up with other policies.
The key will be for him to give enough specifics to look serious and substantial and presidential without getting into the weeds. See, Donald Trump wins when he talks about the generalities, making America great again, controlling our immigration.
Want to hear that.
They want to hear those generalities. That when you get into the details, that's when someone will say, "Oh, that doesn't sound very conservative, or that doesn't sound very Republican to me," which creates problems for him in some ways. So he's going to have to provide some specifics without getting in the weeds. And on his immigration plan, he handled it, disagree with it or not, but he handled that fairly well, putting enough specifics and he'd say, I have a plan, without getting too pinned down on exactly what it's going to look like.
And people want legal immigration. Liz, go ahead, 5 seconds, Chris.
Liz, in politics, people don't really start paying attention to specifics till it's almost time to vote, and he's got plenty of time for that.
Meaning voters are kind of disengaged right now. Good point.